Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my running back rankings for Week 8. As always, they're intended for half PPR leagues, and thankfully, there is not a single team on bye in Week 8. So we get a full bevy of options, at least regarding the teams, but there are some players I did not rank due to injury in this video. Christian McCaffrey does not look to return until at least after the Week 9 bye. I genuinely don't think he'll be back until Thanksgiving, but Isaiah Pacheco remains on IR for at least one more game, maybe 3. We'll hope to get him back as early as Week 9. Gus Edwards, though, is on IR. Cordero Patterson, not ranked. I believe he will be out once again. And Jerome Ford didn't play last week. I did not rank him. I think he's out. Same goes for Tyjae Spears. He's not ranked in this video. So let's get into the rankings. At number 1, it's pretty obvious. Derrick Henry is on a tear. He is still the king, and through 7 weeks this season, Henry is the NFL's leading rusher with 873 rushing yards. The number 2 leading rusher would be Jordan Mason, who's over 200 yards behind him with only 667. So Derrick Henry is just elite. There's no questions about it. He also has 10 total touchdowns on the season. If Derrick Henry wasn't playing with Lamar Jackson, he would arguably be making the case for league MVP. He is that good. Derrick Henry is the number 1 running back in the NFL. There are no questions about it. Number 2, though, I'm going with Breece Hall this week at the Patriots, who's been kind of bad his last 4 games. It includes 2 stinkers, an average of 12.6 points per game. But if you look a little closer, ever since Robert Saleh got fired, over the last 2 games, Breece Hall's been elite, an average of 21.3 points per game. With over 100 receiving yards last week, he will go off once again, especially because this matchup is phenomenal. The Patriots rank top 2 against the position, allowing 30.2 points per game over their last 5 to the running back position. An average of 153 rushing yards per game. Breece Hall's definitely going off here, along with 8 touchdowns as well. He will find the end zone with certainty. He's also been very good over the course of his career against the Patriots. In his last 2 games against New England, an average of 21.2 points per game. That's basically what he's averaging the last 2 weeks as well. On 29 touches, 3 catches per game, 137 total yards per game, and 2 touchdowns in this 2-game sample size. So Breece Hall will be fantastic. I think he's back to being the player you expected when you drafted him. Number 3, I'm going with Kyren Williams versus Minnesota, who's such a stud. 100 yards and a touchdown is practically guaranteed from him. Over his last 4 games, he's averaging 20.9 points per game on 23.3 touches per game, 1.8 catch, 100 total yards per game, and 7 total touchdowns. He is a lock to find the end zone. He is fantastic. So while you do kind of worry about the Vikings defense, they did just get torched by Jahmyr Gibbs. A good running back like Kyren Williams will be able to exploit them. The volume is guaranteed. So trust Kyren Williams. He's a stud this season. Number 4, I have Kenneth Walker versus Buffalo, another stud looking elite this year. In his last 4 games, he's averaging 20.5 points per game, on par with Kyren Williams. Only 16.5 touches per game, though. The volume is not elite, but in the passing game, it's fantastic. 5.3 catches per game, 88 yards per game, and 6 touchdowns in his 4 games this year. He's been a lock to find the end zone this season. This matchup also ranks top 8, and his role in the passing game will pay off because the Bills have given up 5.8 catches per game and 47 receiving yards per game over their last 5 games. They are vulnerable to pass-catching running backs. So Walker's going to be fine. He definitely will find the end zone, and I think his floor is guaranteed for at least 16, 18-plus points. He's a lock in your lineup. His volume is just so secure. It's a bit shocking in the passing game this season, but that keeps his floor very high, especially in full PPR. You cannot bench Kenneth Walker. I'm also not benching Saquon Barkley ever, but this week I only have him at number 5. I think he falls back down to earth just a little bit after that revenge game. I don't think he puts up 176 rushing yards for the 2nd week in a row, but he's probably going to find the end zone over his last 4 games, an average of 18.6 points, 18 touches, 2.5 catches, 128 yards per game, and 3 touchdowns over the last 4 weeks. So he's a stud. You're not benching him. He is the heartbeat of this offense. Number 6, I'm going with Jonathan Taylor at Houston, and I'm tempted to rank him higher because historically he does own the Texans. In his last 5 games versus Houston, Taylor is averaging 23.5 points per game on 26 touches, 1.4 catch per game, 144 yards per game, and 7 touchdowns in this 5-game sample size. So he owns them. However, in week 1, they did hold him in check. He only gave you 48 rushing yards and a touchdown, 10.8 points from Taylor. But if that's his floor, he is bust proof, and he's also been really good this season. Over his last 4 games when healthy, Taylor is averaging 17.4 points per game this season on just under 20 touches per game, only 1.5 catch per game, but 107 yards per game with 4 total touchdowns. He has been a very, very good option this season, a clear top 10 running back. And this week, I think he will get back on track against Houston. I do not believe they limit him for the second game in a row. He normally dominates the Texans. So I think he gets back to that type of elite performance level. I think he will be the best player on the field this week. And week 1 was a bit of an outlier when you look at the history of this divisional matchup. So I still believe in Taylor. I think he'll be healthy. I think he will play. And I think he leads the Colts to victory. I genuinely do think Taylor will be the difference in this game. So even though the matchup is bottom 10, they have only given up 1 touchdown to the position over the last 5 weeks. I'm not worried about it. I think Taylor's a lock in your lineup. He will find the end zone. He will go over 100 yards. Give me Jonathan Taylor as a top 6 running back in week 8. I also think Joe Mixon in the same game is a lock in your lineup. He's my number 7 running back this week versus the Colts. And in his 3 games this season, he is lights out, an average of 20.9 points per game on just under 22 touches per game, 2.5 catches, 121 yards per game, and 5 touchdowns in this 3-game sample size. While he was hurt earlier in the season, he is healthy right now, and he looks like the focal point of their offense, especially with that Nico Collins. He is arguably their best weapon. So the volume will persist. I'm not worried about it, and he feels like a guaranteed option to go for over 100 yards and a touchdown. I'm just hoping the volume doesn't bite them in the ass. I hope Mixon stays healthy, because without him, they do not have the same caliber offense, especially while Nico Collins is on IR. So I think he's a great play every single week, and this week I have him at number 7. I was tempted to rank him higher, but I kind of feel like RBs 2 through 10 are all kind of in the same tier. I genuinely think like once you get past Derrick Henry, there's a group of players that you all kind of expect to go over 20 points, and Mixon is one of those guys. Number 8, another one of those guys, would be Bijan Robinson at Tampa Bay, who's been better over the last 2 games. He has scored 3 touchdowns in those back-to-back matchups. So you love to see that. That's what was kind of missing from his profile this season. And over the last 4 games, he's getting back to top 10. An average of 16.1 points per game, 17 touches per game, 3.3 catches, 100 yards per game, and those 3 touchdowns that I just mentioned. So he's been very safe the last 2 weeks. You're a lot more encouraged. However, against Tampa, he hasn't been elite in his career. In his last 2 games against Tampa Bay, an average of 13.3 points per game, 15 touches, 4 catches per game, 83 yards per game, and only 1 touchdown in this 2-game sample size. And if you look back to week 5 against Tampa, this game went into overtime. Kirk Cousins threw for over 500 yards. However, Bijan was nothing special, only 61 rushing yards, 16 receiving yards, 15 total touches, 3 catches, no touchdowns. He did not go over 10 points. So Bijan's still a top 10 play, but against Tampa, it's usually not his best historical spot to be in. Number 9 and 10, back-to-back, the Detroit Lions running backs Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Gibbs did go off last week. He had over 30 fantasy points, while Montgomery did miss some time briefly in that game. He took a knee to the back of the helmet, I believe, and he did come off the field for several drives. Gibbs was going off. He dominated the Vikings, which was not the easiest matchup, but assuming that Montgomery is back, this is going to be back to the 1A, 1B rotation that they like to implement in their game plan. Both of these players are must starts, and usually their volume is identical. Over the last 4 games, it does look pretty similar. 16 touches per game for both players, about 2 catches per game for both players. Gibbs has been more efficient with 108 yards per game, 5 total touchdowns. Montgomery, 88 total yards per game and 4 total touchdowns. So both players are fantastic. Both guys offering at least 15.3 points per game. Gibbs was just so good last week, it kind of skews these averages in his favor. But as long as Montgomery's healthy, you're starting both. They're both pretty much locks for the end zone and at least 80, 90 yards every single week. They're both top 10 rest of season. Number 11, though, I think Jordan Mason is going to be back in your lineup this week. I think he's an excellent start because the matchup is top 4. The Cowboys, over their last 5 games versus running backs, allowed 27 points per game. That does include 2 matchups, though, against Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara. But Mason is pretty good this season. I don't think he's that far off from that tier. And the Cowboys give up 120 rushing yards per game and 41 receiving yards per game to the position on top of 8 total touchdowns over the last 5 games. So good matchup. I think Mason will exploit it. And especially with the injury to Brandon Ayuk, Juwan Jennings isn't 100% healthy. Debo dealing with pneumonia, maybe doesn't play. They will have to lean a little bit more on Mason. So I think he finds the end zone with confidence this week. And over his last 4 games, while he's only giving you 1 touchdown, an average of 12 points per game, he is still going over 100 yards from scrimmage on average. So I trust the floor. I think this week the touchdown hits. And as long as he doesn't exit the game early with that shoulder injury, I think Mason is a top 12 running back this week. I do want to start him against Dallas. I think it's a get-right game, and the Niners dominate. Mason will find the end zone. I think he's a must-start in Week 8. Number 12, I think James Conner, after last week, also deserves to be in your lineup once again. Only 12.4 points per game over his last 4, but mainly because of only 1 touchdown. Just like Jordan Mason, he's also averaging over 100 scrimmage yards on a per-game basis. Last week, he went over 150 total against the Chargers, and it was a bad matchup. This is a top 5 matchup, however. The Dolphins against running backs can't really stop anything. They've given up 9 touchdowns to the position over the last 5 games, an average of 25.8 points per game to running backs overall. So Connor's going to be fine. I think he finds the end zone very easily here, and the volume will be fine. He'll go over 100 yards for the 2nd week in a row. I think Connor's floor is elite in Week 8, a must start, in my opinion. At number 13, though, I think you still have to start James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. He gets the Seahawks this week on the road, and due to the nature of this offense, you pretty much always project a touchdown for James Cook. But over his last 4 games, he actually has been rather touchdown dependent, an average of 12 points per game with 3 touchdowns. So if you remove that from the equation, he's not even averaging 8 points per game because his efficiency has been coming down. Only 14.8 touches per game, 1.8 catch for 67 yards per game. That's not elite. That's not special. And due to the nature of this offense, it's very crowded. They can rotate which player is going off any given week, and that means other guys can get kind of relegated to a backup type of role. They can kind of get forgotten in this crowded offense. And last week, in his return from injury, Cook only had 12 touches. That's a bit of a red flag. Ray Davis did only have 6, however. James Cook is still clearly the guy you want. So I'm not going to panic. I'm a little worried he's not totally healthy, but I do think the touches will come back to him, and the touchdowns especially will continue. I'm still starting James Cook, but I am a little bit worried about what I'm seeing. This offense is a bit random, and some weeks James Cook can go off for 3 touchdowns. Other weeks he can give you less than 50 yards, and without a touchdown, you can get burned in your lineup. So a little risky, but still worth a start. The upside is too high to ignore. I'm still going to start James Cook against the Seahawks. Number 14, I have Josh Jacobs at Jacksonville, who over his last 4 games has scored 2 touchdowns. He's getting a bit more involved in the red zone. You love to see that, an average of 13.5 points per game on just under 18 touches, 3.3 catches per game, just under 90 yards per game as well. The floor is very high with Josh Jacobs. The matchup is also top 7 this week. The Jags allowed 24.7 points per game, 68 rushing yards per game, but in the passing game, oh, you can exploit them. 7 catches per game, 60 receiving yards per game to the position. The league average is about 4 catches for 35 yards per game. So excellent spot here for pass catching running backs. I do think Jacobs will get the ball and definitely find the end zone. They've given up 7 touchdowns to running backs over the last 5 games. So Jacobs, I think, has very high odds to find the end zone once again. And as long as that happens, you're very happy with him in your lineup because the volume keeps the floor very high. I think you get 10 plus points regardless of the touchdown. And when it hits, you approach 20. And over the last 3 weeks, he has scored 2 touchdowns, but he only has 2 touchdowns on the season. So it is trending in his favor. Over the last 3 weeks, he has been a lot more involved near the goal line. So that's what you're hoping for. That's what we expected when we drafted him. And he is starting to return that value. It's encouraging. I'm definitely ranking him top 15. I'm not going to bench Josh Jacobs. I'm also getting DeVon Achane back in my lineup this week because Tua is expected to return to the lineup. Achane has been brutal without Tua over his last 4 games, not even averaging 6 points, not a single touchdown for him. It has been abysmal for Achane and this overall offense with the backup quarterback. So you're encouraged with Tua back, and he also gets a top 10 matchup here. The Cardinals ranked number 9 against the position over the last 5 games, allowing 23.7 points per game, 131 rushing yards per game, and 5 total touchdowns. I think Achane will be just fine. So similar to Alvin Kamara, his success is dependent on the quarterback play this season, and it appears like Tua will return, so that's kind of all I need to know. I'm not ready to put him back in the top 5. I kind of just want to see it before I do that. But he's definitely a safe RB2 with plenty of upside. I could envision 25 plus points from Achane this week. So a must-start option. I think running back is very deep this week with no teams on bye. He is one of the better options overall. Number 16, still a player that I think is locked into your lineup. It's Kareem Hunt at Las Vegas. And in 3 games this season with the Chiefs, Kareem Hunt is averaging 16.3 points per game, 22.7 touches per game, less than 2 catches per game, but 95 yards per game, 3 touchdowns in this 3-game sample size. Kareem Hunt is fantastic, and the offense is so depleted, I don't see this volume changing. Until Isaiah Pacheco gets back, I think they will lean on Kareem Hunt like crazy. He's a workhorse that they're just going to ride into the ground if possible. He is one of their best options overall in this offense. And against the Raiders with that offseason Kermit the Frog situation, I think Mahomes is going to go off in this one. They're going to dominate the Raiders, and Kareem Hunt will definitely find the end zone. I think he scores a touchdown with ease. So this matchup is not one that scares you at all. It ranks top 10. They've given up 6 touchdowns to the position over the last 5 weeks. Kareem Hunt will get back to at least 16 points in your lineup. I think he's a must start in week 8. Number 17, I have DeAndre Swift at Washington, who's also been lights out over his last 4 games, an average of 17.5 points per game. He's been hyper efficient, 20.5 touches, 3.8 catches, 111 total yards per game, and 3 touchdowns. He is fantastic. So a very slow beginning to the season, but it really turned around quickly. And in this matchup, I think he will be very effective. The Commanders allow 122 rushing yards per game to the running back position. So he's going to be fine. My only concern is that the passing game really gets going. The Commanders are bad in the secondary, and maybe all the touchdowns go through the air with Caleb Williams and the receivers. But I do think Swift is a very safe play. The only threat in this offense, in this backfield, would be Roschon Johnson, and I expect 20 touches to continue for DeAndre Swift every week. He has top 20 value as long as that is the case. Number 18, another player I cannot bench, would be Aaron Jones at the Rams, and I honestly feel like I'm ranking him a little too low here. In his last 4 games, while healthy, Aaron Jones is averaging 16 fantasy points per game on just under 19 touches, 3.3 catches per game, 114 yards per game, and only 2 touchdowns. So he's not touchdown dependent. He's very efficient, and it feels like 100 plus yards is guaranteed. The Rams are also allowing 119 rushing yards per game on the ground to opposing running backs. So Aaron Jones will eat. I think the bye came at a perfect time for him to stay healthy while he was dealing with the hip injury. He looked rested last week. He looked healthy and explosive as ever. Against Detroit, it was a tough matchup, and he paid off. So he is a must start every week. I think he's a obvious top 20 option. At the worst, I kind of feel like he should be ranked top 12. Kind of similar to the top 10. They're all kind of in a similar tier. I think running backs 11 through 20 are all in a similar tier as well. I don't think you can bench any of them, and the touchdown also feels pretty safe to happen. Speaking of which, Bijan Robinson Jr. is a touchdown machine. In 6 games this season, he has 6 total touchdowns. He has 5 in his last 4 games. And while he has been banged up, not getting a ton of volume in that sample size, he's averaging 14 points per game. And last week, he found the end zone again, even while Jaden Daniels was off the field. So Bijan Robinson, just a lock to find the end zone. And if you recall, back in Arizona when Cliff Kingsbury had James Conner in his first year in Arizona, Conner scored 18 touchdowns. That's the role that the RB1 is going to provide in the Cliff Kingsbury offense. So Bijan Robinson is a lock in your lineup. Even if Jaden Daniels doesn't play, I think Bijan Robinson is one of the highest floor options you can find. The touchdown is essentially guaranteed. Number 20, feels crazy to rank him this low, but I still feel like the floor is very high with Alvin Kamara. At the Chargers, it's not the best matchup, though. The Chargers rank bottom 2 in terms of matchups. Over the last 5 games, they've only allowed 15 points per game to opposing running backs, an average of 88 rushing yards per game, and only 1 touchdown overall. So unlikely for him to find the end zone in this matchup. However, it's really just my lack of confidence in the quarterback play making me rank him this low. If you get Spencer Rattler again for the 3rd straight week, then Kamara is not safe at all. The defense knows that he's getting the ball, especially with Rashid Shaheed out of the lineup. They don't have to worry about that deep pass hitting as much, and they can stack the box. They can prevent Kamara from doing any damage on the ground and even the passing game. So while the volume should be there, I just don't trust the efficiency. I think he'll get tackled behind the line of scrimmage a lot in this game. And while he might break a few plays, I just don't think it gives you a viable top 10 running back anymore. Maybe Derek Carr returns. That is possible. If it does happen, I will move him up the rankings. However, the matchup's just really bad, and without a good quarterback, I do not trust this offense to move the ball at all. So Kamara is a bit of a liability with Rattler under center, and until that changes, I'm not willing to rank him any higher than 20 this week in a bad matchup. Number 21, in the exact same game, I have J.K. Dobbins versus New Orleans, and I kind of feel too low on Dobbins. He's been bad the last 4 games, averaging only 10 points per game, but part of that involved the injuries to the offensive line and the quarterback before that bye week. So he has played a lot better when all of those components are healthy in this offense, but only 10 points with only 1 touchdown over the last month is not encouraging. However, this matchup is elite. The Saints just let Javonte Williams torch them for over 110 yards and 2 touchdowns, and J.K. Dobbins probably sees enough volume to do something similar to that this week. The Saints have given up 30.9 points per game over the last 5 to running backs, an average of 146 rushing yards per game, 46 receiving yards per game, and 8 total touchdowns. I think Dobbins is an extremely safe play. I wanted to rank him top 15, and then I started looking at all the other players and how they've been going. Like, I genuinely think you could rank him above Josh Jacobs and DeVon Achane this week. I think he's on the same level as James Cook and James Conner. The matchup indicates this is an opportunity for Dobbins to go off. So we saw Javonte exploit them last week. It's definitely possible. I think the floor is very high for JK, but his track record has been a little bad the last month. That's why he's not inside the top 20, but one of the best flex plays you can find. I think he's still a must start because the matchup is so good. Same applies with Javonte Williams. The matchup is truly elite. The Panthers rank top 3 over the last 5 weeks and number 1 on the season in terms of matchups. They have allowed 30.1 points per game to the position over the last 5 games, an average of 120 rushing yards per game with 11 touchdowns over the last 5 weeks. Javonte will score a touchdown once again. Last week, he was elite against the Saints. He took advantage of a good matchup, and with extra rest, a mini bye week to prepare, he will be excellent once again. I think he will take advantage of a good matchup. While I don't fully trust him, I think there's still a world where he loses his job this season. Last week definitely helped him keep it, and I do see a lot of volume for him. I think they'll lead early on against the Panthers and never really look back. They're just going to lean on Javonte and kill the clock, move on to week 9 as quickly as possible with the run game leading the way. So Javonte is safer. He has given you 12.6 points per game over the last 4, but it's really just the matchup that has me excited. That I think will work out well for him in week 8. I think he's a very high-end flex play. I am telling you to start Javonte Williams against the Panthers. Number 23, I have Najee Harris versus the Giants, who also feels like a very high-end floor play. Over his last 4 games, Najee is averaging 13.2 points per game on 17.3 touches, 1.8 catch, 94 yards per game, and 2 touchdowns. That's the really nice thing to see for Najee Harris, because the volume has been there for him all season long, but now he's actually doing something with it. If you get that touchdown, you feel a lot safer to go over 10 plus points. So that's critical. Over the last 2 games, Najee also has over 100 rushing yards per game and a touchdown in each of those matchups as well. So while I'm not ready to declare Russell Wilson the clear savior in Pittsburgh, it did seem to help the run game last week, having an actual downfield threat and element in the passing game. So Najee, I think, is very safe at the moment. Jaylen Warren still not 100% healthy, and even though he did get more involved last week, Najee Harris's touches are not in question. So while yes, the touchdown could dry up at any point and you wouldn't be surprised, at the moment it is somewhat safer to hit, and I do think the offense will rely on him a little bit more in the red zone without Justin Fields. You won't get all the scrambles that vulture those rushing touchdowns. So I do think Najee Harris is pretty safe, just like J.K. Dobbins and Javonte. I think he's worth a start, a very high-end flex play in week 8. At number 24, I have Tank Bigsby versus Green Bay, and Bigsby's been really good over the last 4 games, an average of 15.2 points per game. While he was shut down by Chicago, otherwise 3 of his last 4 games has given you at least 90 rushing yards as well as 4 touchdowns, an average of 6.7 yards per carry over the last month. So I think Bigsby has earned the RB1 job in this backfield. Even if Etienne is healthy, I do not think you can trust Etienne at all. And it's also possible that Etienne will not play for the 2nd week in a row. So if that happens, that gives Bigsby the clear workhorse role. Entering the season, we expected Etienne to have top 12 value, and it's not like this offense can't provide that on a weekly basis. It just appears that all of that value has shifted in favor of Bigsby. So I kind of want to see it one more time. For some reason, I just don't quite trust that he gets 26 touches every week, but I think he's a very high-end floor play, and if Etienne doesn't suit up, I will rank him a lot higher. I am expecting Etienne to be available in week 8. That's why I only rank Bigsby at number 24. Number 25, though, a bit of a workhorse in his own offense, would be Rico Dowdle at San Francisco. In his last 4 games, Dowdle is averaging 11.5 points per game on 13.8 touches, 2.8 catches, 72 yards per game, and 2 touchdowns. The touchdowns have been pretty critical. It does help a lot, but I just have a hard time fully trusting him for some reason. I'll be completely honest with you. I did drop him earlier in the season in the subscriber league, and while I do regret it, I was not going to be starting him over the last 2 games with the bye, as well as that Detroit Lions matchup a couple weeks ago. So I don't totally regret it, but at the moment I'd really like to have Dowdle on my bench. So it's a bit of a catch-22. It wasn't my best decision, but it kind of speaks to why I don't fully trust him, and maybe I'm just coping with that decision. But they probably give him more consistent volume following the bye. I'm sure the Cowboys self-scouted over their bye week, and it does look like Dowdle is one of their best weapons. Other than Lamb, who else is safe to find the end zone? They have very few weapons, and Dowdle is one of their best options, so he probably finds the end zone here. But I do worry about the Niners matchup in general. They have kind of dominated the Cowboys in the past, and it could get ugly here. But without the touchdown, I'm not expecting 10 plus points from Dowdle, and that's why I think he's just a flex play still. Not quite ready to rank him any higher than RB25. Number 26, though, moving down the ranks would be Chuba Hubbard at Denver. And part of this ranking is because I am expecting Jonathan Brooks to make his debut this season in week 8. If Jonathan Brooks is healthy, then that really messes up this volume for Chuba Hubbard. Over his last 4 games as the workhorse, he is averaging about 20 touches per game, 3.3 catches, 93 yards per game, and with 3 touchdowns is averaging 14.9 fantasy points per game. So Chuba has been great ever since they pivoted to Andy Dalton. This offense has provided a lot more value in this backfield, and Chuba has been the guy that you wanted. But last week, he only bailed you out with a garbage time touchdown. Otherwise, he would have been pretty brutal, and their offense looked like complete trash against Washington with Deontay Johnson banged up. I do worry that they struggle to move the ball. They just have no other weapons other than Chuba if Deontay is not healthy. So I do worry about that as well. Last week was a bit concerning, but it's mainly the ambiguous backfield and workload touch split that you're going to get if Jonathan Brooks is active this week. And the matchup is also bottom 6. The Broncos only give up 17.1 points per game to the position, and it kind of feels likely that if Brooks is healthy, if they have a chance to give him a touchdown, that'll probably happen. So I do think Hubbard will get vultured this week. You're hoping for a second touchdown to be available from this offense, and that is not quite a safe bet at all. So I worry about Chuba this week. I want to see it in this backfield, but obviously if Brooks remains out, I will rank him back in the top 15. I would expect the volume to carry you with Chuba Hubbard if he is the workhorse with no Brooks. So monitor Jonathan Brooks' status. That's the key for this ranking this week. I would start him if Brooks doesn't play. I think he's arguably a player to bench, though, if Brooks is active. We will find out. Number 27, I have Chase Brown versus Philly, who is the clear number 1 running back who's overtaken Moss in this backfield. But he gets a very difficult matchup here versus the Eagles. They rank bottom 4 against the position. Over the last 5 games, Philly has only allowed 16.8 points per game to the position on 94 rushing yards per game, 40 receiving yards per game, but only 1 total touchdown. That's what I'm worried about. I do not think Chase Brown finds the end zone in this game. However, he has scored 4 touchdowns over his last 4 games, an average of 13.7 points. And in this offense, there's usually some value to be had. So I would consider him as a solid flex play, but in this matchup, I'd rather fade him. I do not think he finds the end zone, and that is the critical piece here. He's been a little touchdown dependent this season. Without the touchdown, he is only giving you about 7-8 points per game. If that's what you get this week, you will be disappointed. So I think you can bench him. I think this is the point where we are clearly in the flex consideration where you might be just pivoting to wide receiver if they have a better matchup. So you don't have to start him, but he's probably offering you an 8 or 9 point floor this week. Chase Brown gets a downgrade because of the matchup. Number 28 and 29, though, back to back, I have Bucky, Irving, and Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Falcons. Irving in his last 4 games is averaging 12.3 points per game. Meanwhile, Rachaad in his last 4 games is averaging 12.4 points per game. They're both seeing about 12.5, 13 touches, while Rachaad is getting a few more targets and receptions. They're both averaging 73, 74 yards per game. Bucky has 1 extra touchdown, but still their usage is pretty identical, and I don't think it's going to change. Even when Rachaad White was inactive, Sean Tucker had a 50-50 split with Bucky Irving in this backfield. So that's what they want to do in Tampa. It's clearly a split backfield every single week, and they both offer the same type of value. It's just a question of will they find the end zone or not and offer you that ceiling. However, the matchup is average. I'm not too worried about it. It's just a gamble what will happen. And with no Chris Godwin and possibly no Mike Evans as well, I do worry a little bit about this new offense that could struggle to move the ball. It's just not going to be as proficient as it was with Godwin and Evans healthy. So that's my concern. The matchup isn't like a massive upgrade. It's just average. So at number 28 and 29, they're decent flex plays, but more so just floor options. I think they're both going to have the exact same fantasy value. Rest of season, it looks pretty clear they're used in a 50-50 split. in Tampa. Number 30, I have Nick Chubb versus Baltimore, who probably doesn't score a touchdown this week against the Ravens. It's not a good matchup overall. The Ravens have only given up 2 touchdowns to the position over the last 5 weeks. However, they are vulnerable in the passing game, but that's not what Nick Chubb offers. He's not a pass catcher. And last week in his return to the field, he had 9.7 points, only 12 touches, 1 reception, only 32 yards against the Bengals, but he got bailed out by a touchdown, and it was his first game back. It was pretty obvious they would give that touchdown to him. So he is touchdown dependent. I am a little worried it does not happen this week, and without it, you're not going to get 10 plus points. Even with it, it might be just like last week, you only get 9.7, including the touchdown. So I do worry about it. He's very touchdown dependent, and this offense is hard to predict without Deshaun Watson. Maybe they're better, but without Amari Cooper, they could still be terrible, and I do worry about it. It's extremely reliant on that touchdown hitting. And at this point, I think I'd rather just bench Nick Chubb. I see a very limited ceiling for him in only his second game back from that injury. Number 31, though, I am benching Tony Pollard this week against Detroit. It is a terrible matchup. The Lions rank bottom 3 against the position, only allowing 15.6 points per game on only 61 rushing yards per game allowed to running backs. But they have given up 4 touchdowns over the last 5 games. That's why they don't rank as the worst matchup. But 3 of those touchdowns did go to Kenneth Walker. And I do not believe Pollard is in the same tier as Walker, so I'd be very concerned about Pollard here. I think the Titans offense is going to struggle mightily, and they will definitely not play well against Detroit. I think they'll completely lock up Tony Pollard. So bad matchup. I don't really care about the volume. He has played somewhat okay the last 4 games, averaging 11.5 points per game, but without the touchdown, he will definitely not crack 10 points, and I have a hard time believing he even cracks 6 or 7 against Detroit. It's a terrible matchup here. Definitely downgrade Tony Pollard. I think you should bench him in week 8. Number 32, I'm also benching Rhamondre Stevenson versus the Jets. If you recall, in week 5 against them, he had that fumble and only put up 0.3 points in week 5. So while that probably doesn't happen again, I don't feel like you trust him at all. He did not play well last week in a very good matchup against Jacksonville, and this is a bottom 5 matchup against the Jets. So really not trusting him. In his last 4 games, he's only averaging 6.8 points per game already. And it's not safe to project like 20 touches for Rhamondre. He's been very unsafe over the last month. And I honestly feel like they could still pivot to Antonio Gibson at any point in time. If Rhamondre fumbles again, he has not earned your trust back. He was playing well in the first couple weeks. He's been brutal ever since. And I don't think you have to start Rhamondre at all this week, but I would start him over Antonio Gibson straight up. That's not saying much though. No, thank you with Rhamondre this week. Number 33, I'm also benching Tyrone Tracy at Pittsburgh. Rough matchup against the Steelers. We might get Daniel Jones again. He might get benched for Drew Lock again. And this offense was just absolutely terrible last week against Philly. And it's hard to gauge what to expect here because Singletary returned. However, the offense was just so bad, it didn't really matter. However, Tracy did get the most touches last week. He had 9 total touches in week 7. Meanwhile, Singletary had 6. So if you're getting a 60-40 split, that's not ideal. You'd like to see at least 80% to feel confident in Tracy because the offense is bad. You need the volume to carry you to a safe floor. I'm not convinced the touchdown hits this week, so I'm just going to bench the Giants running backs until I get some more clarity on what to expect. I think they're both pretty risky. If I was starting one, it would be Tracy, but I don't think he's worth a safe start in week 8, not against Pittsburgh. No thank you with Tyrone Tracy. Number 34, I have Raheem Mostert versus Arizona, who in his last 2 games is getting 16 touches per game, but that included 1 game where Achane had a concussion. So it's hard to predict exactly what will happen in this offense with Tua Tagovailoa back on the field, but Mostert is still involved. You're hoping for a touchdown, though. It's not the worst bet, but he's definitely a low-end flex option. I think I'd rather bench Mostert until I know what I'm getting in this offense with Tua back healthy. At 35, though, this is a bit of a gut call. I'm ranking Jonathan Brooks here at Denver, who is still questionable. He's not a guarantee to come off of IR and make his debut in week 8. But if he does, I kind of feel like it's the Nick Chubb situation all over again. He feels like a lock to score a touchdown because they want to get him involved. They want the crowd to feel good about something, and there are very few things to be optimistic about in Carolina. Jonathan Brooks is one of those few things to feel hopeful about. So I do think he will get a touchdown. It'll be kind of cheap, though. He might not get more than 8 touches in this game. He might not even get more than 5, and they might really slow play him into this offense. So I do worry about that. It's a big red flag, but I really think he gets a touchdown. I do think that 6 points does hit. So that's why I rank him still at number 35. And I don't think he's the worst flex play. If you're super desperate like I am in the subscriber league, I've been rolling with Trey Sermon, waiting for Pacheco to get healthy. I am probably forced to start Jonathan Brooks in my lineup if Taylor does come back to the field. So good luck with him. I think we're definitely going to need it. There's no way he all of a sudden gets like 20 plus touches. That's not going to happen until at least after the week 11 bye. For now, though, if he is healthy enough to play, I think he finds the end zone. I think it will be a heavy committee, though, between him and Chuba Hubbard. I'd still rather trust Chuba Hubbard over Jonathan Brooks. But the touchdown, I think, is worth betting on. I think it hits for him. That's the only reason I rank him top 40 this week. At number 36, though, he's a starting running back in the NFL, but you are benching Alexander Mattison versus Kansas City this week. Last week, he did have 26 touches, 3 catches, 123 yards against the Rams. But even though he's overtaken Jahmyr White as their clear number 1 running back, I don't want to start anyone against Kansas City. This is the worst matchup on paper. The Chiefs, over the last 5 games, have only allowed 10.9 points per game to the position, with 1 touchdown overall, 58 rushing yards per game, and less than league average in the receiving game as well. So I'm very worried about any running back going up against Kansas City this season. It is a massive downgrade, and he is very desperate for a touchdown in order to pay off this week. I am not starting Mattison at all. Maybe the volume is there to carry you to like 8 or 9 points, but it's really dependent on that touchdown hitting. I do not think it happens, and I think the Raiders get completely blown out by the Chiefs here. I think they struggle to put up even 1 touchdown on offense. No way, Jose. I am benching Mattison for sure. There is no way he's cracking my lineup. If I have Mattison against Kansas City, you should be benching him this week. At 37, though, I have Austin Ekeler versus Chicago, who is averaging 8.8 points per game over the last month. He offers an interesting floor, although it doesn't involve a lot of work. Only 8 touches per game, 1 touchdown, but he is pretty efficient. He's turning those 8 touches into 61 total yards per game. Robinson, though, is stealing all the touchdowns, and Ekeler is strictly a floor play. He needs that touchdown to hit, and I don't think it happens because B-Rob is not sharing that often. Number 38, I have Zach Moss versus Philadelphia, who has definitely lost his job to Chase Brown. He's clearly the backup now, and the matchup is bottom 3, so I'm not going to press my luck. I do not see a touchdown for Zach Moss against the Eagles. I'm also benching Travis Etienne versus Green Bay, who's questionable, might not even play, but I really have no idea what to even expect from him anymore, assuming he's active. I still think Bigsby would be the guy to start. So bench Etienne for now. It's way too risky, and he could exit the game early with injury. It happened a couple weeks ago, and it could happen again. I do not trust Etienne at all at the moment. At 40 in a split backfield, I have Devin Singletary at Pittsburgh, and I definitely would only trust Tyrone Tracy of the 2. But in a tough matchup against the Steelers, I don't want either of them in my lineup. I need more clarity in this backfield before I trust any of them, to be honest with you. These last 10, I'm kind of just going to rip through, though, for the sake of speed. I have Roschon Johnson at 41, who does have 3 touchdowns over the last 4 games. Maybe it happens again. At 42, I have Justice Hill, who does get involved in the passing game, but could also burn you as well. It's very hard to predict with Justice Hill. At 43, I have Jaylen Warren versus the Giants, who's starting to get healthy, did have 14 touches last week for 6.9 points, but I think Najee Harris is the clear guy to trust in this backfield. I wouldn't trust multiple players at this point in time. At 44, I have Tyler Algier, who is averaging 8.8 points per game over the last month, but kind of touchdown dependent. Just an annoying factor for Bijan owners. But number 45, I have Ray Davis, who did score a touchdown in week 7, but only had 6 touches. Cook had 12. I wouldn't trust it too much. At 46, it's an elite matchup for Jaleel McLaughlin versus the Panthers, but in his last 4 games, only averaging 5.5 points per game. He is very touchdown dependent. I'd rather avoid it. It could start to pivot in favor of Audric Estime, who did fumble last week, though. Number 47, I have Zach Charbonnet versus Buffalo, who's also kind of getting involved. They do give up a lot of receptions to running backs, so maybe something happens for him, but you're just hoping for a touchdown at this point. Same goes with Antonio Gibson. He's been efficient, but not safe. I think now that Devontae Adams is available in the Jets offense, that third weapon is not up for grabs anymore, and Braylon Allen loses almost all value, so I have him here at number 49. And then last player ranked would be Ty Chandler at the Rams, who's been brutal this season, but it is possible that Aaron Jones goes down with injury again. He did have a hip injury before the bye, and he was limited in practice last week, but very unlikely that happens. I would not be starting anyone outside the top 40, but here are the top 40 rankings here on the screen, and I feel excellent about running back this week. I think all the way through RB 23 with Najee Harris, you have an elite floor. I think you're getting at least 10-12 points guaranteed. There are some excellent matchups for players that are kind of more middle of the pack, and then players that you always trust have average matchups as well. There are very few downgrades that I'm actually buying into at the running back position. It's mainly guys like Nick Chubb and Alexander Mattison who get a tough shake. So I'm not worried about it. I think once you hit Tank Bigsby, that's like the kind of questionable flex territory. But even him, Rico Dowdle, Chuba Hubbard, Chase Brown, I think are all pretty solid starts. Even Bucky, Irving, and Rachaad White, I think are going to get you like 9+ points. I think they're very safe plays. Running back is very deep this week. Obviously, it helps with no teams on bye, but there's going to be some elite performances from the top 10. As always, those players are locks in your lineup. And there's some really good matchups as well for those players. So I love running back this week. I think you have a lot of depth, and overall, you are expecting high-end double-digit games from all of the top 20 players. Unless you're desperate and you're starting someone outside the top 25, I think you're going to have a lot of production at running back this week. So good luck. Week 8 looks like a good one, and it'll be fun. I'll rank wide receivers tomorrow, but for now, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content. If you have any questions, comment down below. I'll be happy to answer them. But I'll see you next time. My name is Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching Nice and Blunt.